take me an hour or so, but I want to really talk about laying enterprise architecture versus the so-called domain, which is classically how we refer to enterprise architecture, we think of domains. And just to, it is meant to be an interactive session, I don't have any set exercises.
More like some up as we go.
But I'll take the dialectic approach, which is just talk anyway.
Yeah, let's see what you've got, Gov.
Let's see what you've got, Gov. So it was a very informative session. I've enjoyed all of them, but I could get to them. I wish I could be in 3 places at once. Anyway, let's make a start. I've got 51 slides here, so we're death by PowerPoint. We've got an hour, haven't we? So we're finishing at something a little after 5. I think we'll be good to go on that one. So the work I've been involved with is this notion of layered enterprise architecture development. And the thing is, obviously, I've written on here, well, what's the difference anyway about it? So let's get stuck in. That's me, by the way, Simon Polovina of Sheffield Hallam University. Because I figured I've never been here before, I better just say who I am, because I don't know if everybody knows everybody. So I work as an academic and a practitioner and a researcher. I also do work for SAP. Too many things and too little time to do them.
Never heard of that problem.
Yeah, but that's novel. So I am badged up with various enterprise architecture qualifications, and so TOGAF, everybody knows, lead less so. That's what I'm going to talk about. And I've worked with, in terms of bringing academics and practitioners together. That's working and getting academic knowledge into practice and practice into academic knowledge as well. So as a good academic, I write lots of publications. That's one of the KPIs of any environment. I also edit a journal. I'm editor-in-chief, and we put articles in there on EA, enterprise architecture, and so on. And that's all the kind of stuff I do in the bottom. As I say, too much. So this is the sort of agenda I've put in terms of what we're going to be doing. So what's the situation in terms of EA modelling in domains? So I'm just going to draw on TOGAF, because I'm working on the basis that kind of everybody knows it. TOGAF and lead, how they interrelate to one another. And then what do we mean by layers, sub-layers, and something called the anatomy of those layers, and littered with a few examples along the way. And at some point, I'm just going to stop and open up the discussion, and just feel free to ask questions at any time as you go through. If I can't answer it there, I'll say, well, just let me go a bit further, and then we can collate it. So we'll see how it goes. There's only 5 guys in here, including me, so let's just go through it very quickly. One of the classic things to do with EA modelling is this notation critique of the ADM, the wheel in TOGAF, is however we want to craft it, to what extent is it agile? Do we always obviously the other parts, do we always start with business architecture first, and then IS architectures or solution architectures, technology, the actual tin and everything? And that's what I really focus on. I just want to focus around this. Do projects always start BCD? Can there be other routes? Are there sub-areas within here that we need to connect in other ways? So what we've done is taken out this sort of concept of domains, put it back, taken out, put it straight back in as domains, but then refer to them as layers. So I'm not taking anything out of TOGAF.
Right. I'm confused, or would like clarification about what you mean by domains. Because I often think of domains as things like security, as a cross-cutting layer, or cross-cutting domain, rather than...
Yes.
So when you're talking about domains, are you talking about the BCD classic, the VDAT stack layers as domains, or are you talking about the cross-cutting environments?
I'm glad you raised that question, because that's the thing I'm trying to address, because it's about what do you mean by domain. It's one of the things I'm trying to address. I'm glad you said that. I think what you said is pivotal. In the first instance, it's a BCD stuff. Yeah?
So to you, BCD are domains.
That's how we interpret. I interpret things in architecture. But your interpretations of domains is equally valid, and I think that's part.
Yeah. It's a clarification on this point, because they often refer to those as layers.
Yes.
They usually refer to those as layers, which is why I got confused by your domains.
Yes.
I would agree that they are closer to, they should be understood better as domains than as layers. And that's why I'm slightly confused what we're trying to do.
But can we go?
That's why I was saying,
no, I think
I want to flag it, that's it.
Perfect. Please do. I think it's very important. As I go through it, hopefully you can see how it works, and then you can tell me what you think. And I'm here to elicit as much from you and to get feedback and to have an interactive session, because that's why I chose as a workshop. You can tell me what you like, what you don't like, how you think differently. That's the nature of the beast.
I flag it as an issue because
I think you're absolutely right.
The opposite problem. I didn't think the other way around.
No, you're absolutely, it's a good point, and that's one of the things I'm hoping to clarify, because EA, it's all about terminology. Never, yeah, exactly. But just if we just, at least for now, you're absolutely right. So if we talk with some of the work I've recently done is robotic automation, about bringing sort of AI into business. We start with, you could argue that starts with solutions architects. The SAP argument starts with information, such as handheld device automation, the actual tin, the technology itself, how can we enable use of smart technologies and so on. So the question is, it's not a given that we go the classic VCD.
Can I, sorry, you know you're saying SAP starts with C, but really, so if you look at their financial systems, it's all about business processes.
That's what they sell. That's what they sell.
Exactly. So
but
I'm not going to challenge on the C bit, because I would say it's more B.
Okay, at the end of the day, SAP had their own enterprise architecture framework. SAP EEF or SAP EEF, that was predicated on TOGAF. But one of the things SAP said was to start here.
Yeah, so
but I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
I'd say last year we looked at, so I'm drawing on my experience at the moment, so we looked at ERP systems last year, and the view from, this came from our CEO, was I want a system because I want to introduce standard processes into the organisation, and he very much came at it as, if I choose an information system, it allows me to drive standardisation of business process. So you could argue, in that approach, it is a C, which then drives you into a B.
This is how SAP play it out, because they're saying they've actually got a solution architecture that fits what you can do. Look at the solution that's out of the box and then tailor it. So go C, B, D. But then, if you just indulge me, because the way we approach it in lead is to say, let's not get hyped up about where things go in terms of domains, security, VC. Let's look at the things themselves. Are we talking? What are we talking about? The entities themselves.
Do keep going, because it's, I just wanted to flag it as an issue and nothing else.
Yeah. So like a good academic, we always do our research.
Sorry.
As a fully badged enterprise architect, I produce slides that nobody can reach.
Oh my God.
So there's my claim. There's my claim to fame. So there we go. And the history. It's just showing the history of enterprise architecture development. If you're interested, I've got a massive slide deck on it. But these are the kinds of things, the areas. So don't worry about this. This is all the various enterprise. You can find your favourite EAD on here.
It's Spanish anyway, because this is good.
Yeah.
I want a copy of this.
Right. So these are all the EAs, you name it's on here. But this is the pertinent one. There's a timeline, but you can see this is how we've identified the anatomy of each enterprise architecture frame, what it covered and what it didn't cover.
What about maturity? I see. Oh, measures. Yeah.
Maturity, kind of, the way you interpret maturity is obviously in terms of, you can see generally these guys are growing. You see things like specific ones. So, Zapman 2 is interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Zapman 2 is very focused in certain areas and not in others. But
Don't
I just
go on that. Right, Simon, you've just been hearing
Simon,
I'm not.
I like this. This is really good.
Right. So there you are. I've done my research. So there we go. So hopefully,
sorry, no, it's not. Can you go back, please? Where have we captured layers and sublayers?
architecture.
No. What are the layers?
Domains.
What are the layers?
They're coming.
Oh, it's because you thought you marked them off and haven't been done.
This is good. Leave it. I like this.
coming, it's coming,
You're working
it's
towards
coming.
Yeah.
I could, yeah, let me just say it's coming.
Have you published that anywhere?
Yeah.
Where we can
Yeah,
refer
yeah.
to it?
This
Right.
is, all this is published. In fact, the journal, you can read some of the content. We've actually got it's called a business process handbook. It's a big thick tome by Elsevier. Yeah, I'll point to the resources a little bit later on. This is a narrative, this is an extract, but the thing is, across layers, business information technology. And the first reaction you get, well, aren't they the same domains as you've got before? And I'm saying yes, but I want to recraft them. But the key is here is how we actually anatomize the content within that and how we actually approach the notion of layers and sub-layers and what does it mean. At the moment, it's all words. And if I was sitting where you are, I would say, well, you're just emperor's new clothes. You're saying the same thing a different way. So what I need to do is to sort of drill that out a bit. So now I'm just going to talk in terms of layers because it's a convenient vehicle. Layers is not a new concept because you can, if you go back to that dot there. So we have the business layer, we have the information layer, and we have the technology layer. The trick is, how do we start to populate them with what we call sub-layers? So in here we've got value, capability, business service process, application data, so what's new, down to the tin, platform and infrastructure. So the idea is, wherever your project sits in the landscape, you can start wherever you want here. Now, the
So this
thing
is
is,
basically the same as the metamodel and Archimate.
it's the same with metamodel Archimate.
Yeah, which is
Don't
what I
have-
explicitly reject, so I've got a problem here.
Okay, it's
Come
clear.
on, I don't.
I like it. Let me say I have opinions about those metamodels, but let me just park that for now.
Yeah.
So I might be agreeing with you, I don't know. So the idea is, what we're trying to do is, and it was the first workshop this morning, what was the difference between engineering and architecture? So we actually applied principles of enterprise engineering to these in terms of how we start to decompose them. So what this is a result of over 20 years worth of work actually. It's actually going through and looking at the existing standards, existing best practices, working with actual customers and clients, looking at the body of academic knowledge, and from this experience actually crafting how we can decompose the value part into what these are called meta-objects. So these are objects about objects, so we call them meta-objects. And the argument or the hypothesis is that this can cover all kinds of enterprises. So with all of these are just lists of things. Within here, there are descriptions. So I'm interested in, because I come from both a business background and a computer science background, I'm interested in formality and how you can actually provide formal models to that without obviously constraining you. So I'm just going to quickly run through these. So for each of these, we've actually...
I'm going to throw a break here, or throw a wobbly. Can you go back both to service, first of all? Why do these not apply exactly the same, other than the usage of the word business on one case? Why do these not apply exactly the same in application and in platform, and probably in data as well?
Yeah, what I'll do is, if I run through the rest of them,
Yeah.
you'll see these commonalities and how they interrelate to them. What I'm going to show you shortly is like a periodic table of how they're all plumbed together. Yeah? Now, I'm a great subscriber of 80-20. There was a classic statement by a guy called George Box, a statistician: all models are wrong, some are useful. You may have heard of.
So as you read, is always what is it useful for?
It's usefulness we're aiming for here.
And
Perfection
those
is-
you just gone past capability.
Sorry.
Competency.
Yeah.
So you've got competency as opposed to capability. I'm not quite sure what the word.
Yeah, capability is in terms of have you got the competency to deal with it, and then from that, you can't be capable of something unless you're actually competent at it.
But
Yeah, and this also implies in terms of resources, you've got resources important as well. If you're interested, I can pull up full
No, I really
definitions
like
of
this.
these.
Can I just ask one question there? So, as your primary going back to data modeling, as your primary object, you've got business competency, but then within it, you've got business competency as well, as a chart object. So I'm just thinking, why is that there?
Yeah.
Not overarching.
I would, the thing to
I don't want to get wrapped up on it, but I'm obviously...
Yes, well this is the beauty of it, because what you're doing is you're actually critiquing the model, and the idea was to present, and it's gone through a number of iterations, it still can go through more, but the idea, if I describe it in this formal way, you can come in, why are you calling it that? And just, the trick is you get better questions and better discussions from it, because you're putting something on the table, let's have
I fully get that, I really like it, but for me, you've got two entities, one inherits the other one, and they're the same, so...
Let me show you how it works out slightly, because I'm not giving you, to be fair, I'm not giving you the full story.
There's, I will be blunt and say there's a very large number of alarm bells going off, particularly around...
Well, let me finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want you to finish, yeah? And then I can talk about alarm bells as they apply to the whole.
Okay, that's
If
fine
they're
then,
still
yeah.
there, if they're not resolved.
Yeah. So these are the ones in terms of processes. So in terms of process step, business processes, grouping process, gateways, so some of the terminology borrowed from BPMN, for example, business process modeling and notation. So it's about pulling in standards of standards. These are the ones that go down to application on here as well. So talking in terms of terminology that's used in the sort of application solution space. And then down to the data.
Sorry, can you go back to the other one, please? Right, and it's data. So why is there not a logical versus a physical space as well?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just carry on to, if I go
Just
on.
flagging, just flagging.
No, that's fine, that's why we're here. So just flag, see what it's done into here. And then obviously this is going down to the tin in terms of the platform, so logical and physical.
So you have the logical physical here, but not in data.
No. What we're doing is, because again, if we go back to here, is that is to actually recraft some of these between logical and physical data. But it's an interesting question, because in the...
Because there are other implementations than just a table of a physical.
Yeah, because the thing is, what we're trying to do is really look in terms of solutions, talk about data itself, and in here to refer to the physical nature of it. But I'm sensible to the fact.
Do you have, sorry, we've got a platform owner here. Did you have an application owner and data owner? I didn't spot them.
Yeah. Data owner.
Oh yeah, and this application owner. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're sure? Just asking.
That's fine. Okay, so that's just going
No,
through
no,
the last bit. Did I miss that bit?
Infrastructure one, yeah. Logical, physical there.
Okay.
And you've got the owner, you've got the rule, good, yeah.
So how do you actually work with these layers? So really, in terms of, you've seen this already. So these are the layers and sub-layers. So what we do is we actually populate them with those so-called meta-objects that we refer to in here, and then we provide how the objects actually interrelate to one another. Don't worry about all the narrative on here. This is just this is a way of formally describing the model with some discussion above the top here. The thing to really bear in mind, to be honest, I should have got rid of this narrative and showed you this. It's a relationship between the individual meta-objects and the layers.
Yeah.
We see it again here, which is much more useful. So the idea that every single object in these layers interrelates to every other single object. And we describe that through the relations between each of the objects. So this are the meta-objects listed according to the layers. So you've got the business layer, you've got the information layer, you've got the technology layer. And those meta-objects that I described here are actually formally catalogued, and they're given a description of how they are intended to be used.
So there's a periodic table element in the sense that you've got service, 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 you've got physical, logical, you've got owner, for example. That's very, in that sense, it's like the chemical properties are all related to
because
the same
what you do,
thing, but you put them in different entities.
That's right, you put them in entities, and you create basically a compound of what you're trying to do. But then I'm a bit cautious about the analogy with the periodic table because it gets you so far. in
Yeah.
on here. But the idea,
The reason why is because I take the exact opposite direction to you.
okay,
I look at the similarities of the entities and remove the layers. The layers get added on
yeah,
as the labels that you're saying. It's not in fact a layer, it's a view.
yeah.
And so that's the mechanism I've used. So I'm looking at this from that lens and going out.
But that's exactly how you can look at it in terms of here as well, because, for instance, if you're going in, if you're a process-oriented enterprise, and people use this either correctly or incorrectly, then these are the kinds of, the way that they will classify and categorise them. And then you can navigate to everything in house. What you don't see on here is the so-called relations, or we call them semantic relations, between each of these objects. So within here, you've actually got relations that actually describe the relationship. So, for example, you have a project. And we've done this with actual customers. You go in, and the idea is, one example, people working on different projects using their own terminology. They're running lean, but at the end of the day, they're still inside. So try and get them to a shared meaning. So that's one way that we use this. But the idea is you might pick, you don't have to use all 80, there's 87 guys on there, you don't have to use all 87. You can use 20 of them, you can use 5 of them, as many as you like. And the idea is you appropriate in here which elements are relevant to your project, and then the rest, or the other 80%, you can simply just reuse best practices. So all these here already have best practices
And
you
you
can
can
draw upon.
decompose these, because you've got 87, so you must have numbered them for a reason. So,
Yeah.
and you decompose them further.
Yeah, and I'll show you how we decompose them further. All right.
Can I just ask a really quick question? What's driving organisations to choose this model over something like Archimate, which has some similarities, right? But
The point is, it's not about competing in TOGAF, Archimate, or even Zapman Inter Alia. It's about complementary tools. It goes the same to whatever tools you're using in your organisation. The idea is, what we want you to do is think about your project, about the methods. All this is supported by documentation and best practices. It describes for each of these how they are used. It also shows what limitations there are to it, because we recognise that, and how they can be used. So the idea, this is what we call a kind of conceptual, or semantic, not conceptual structure, but semantic structure that you can, and you can drill down, because these are meta objects, because they're very abstract in terms of what they mean to you. To be honest, under the hood, you could get completely rid of all this. Yeah, you can get completely rid of that. It's just in terms of when people, if you just show people that, they'll just go, what is this? It's a jumble. The reality is that we even have a software tool that we use. We just put this on reports. So your point is valid. It's this bit. It's the interrelationships between these entities, or these meta objects. That's how it works.
So I can see how, if you're in an IT-only world, this would be useful. And that's where DAL is most of the time. But I'm dealing with interchangeability of human processes and IT processes and machine processes. And for example, what you're calling an application layer. In many cases, I'm using a human for the same thing. Is it a process or is it an application? Is an application a thing that only exists on a computer? Because in which case, how do you describe something like Amazon Mechanical Turk?
Yeah. The trick
Which
is
a human process intended to simulate, by design,
yes.
an IT application.
Yeah, because classically, and that's because one of the things we found out earlier on was that, for instance, if you think of BPMN, business process implementation, you have an automated activity or a manual activity. And when we say this, we kind of take that edge off of it, because as you say, it could be a human, it could be an automated, it could be a service.
It's got the same sort of problems in a different way.
Yeah, but
Again, it's whether this is fulfilled by a human or a service, so an application role is a human.
Yeah, but I think where he's
For example,
tell me if I'm wrong, but in his business competency layer, he's got actors, he's got resources, and he's got somewhere along there must be orchestrations.
This is your resources, so this is in terms
Yeah.
of things
So
like financials, we
that's
talked
I
about.
get nightmares about this because what happens with Archimate is you have a conflation of the.
Yeah, forget Archimate. I think what.
And this is exactly to me. I don't see really any difference apart from the detail of the meta model. I don't. I've got exactly the same thing with application service, technology service, and so on. The physical versus logical suddenly doesn't appear in the application. I'm a crazy guy. Don't worry about me.
I'm seeing this as a tick list. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is,
tick list of things
please-
that need to be done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Karen.
No, it's fine, it's a good
It's not
point.
exactly, right? Let's be honest. What is that? Exactly is a tick list.
That is a tick list that's missing an entire dimension.
but it's
That's
not-
where the problem comes
Yeah.
in. None of the dimension issue.
Look, Zachman is not an EA framework, and he admits that. What it is a tick list of things you've got to encapsulate when you do that piece of work.
Yeah.
This is coming over as the same. And I can see, so if I was using this and I was running an EA function, I would say, right, have we covered 1 to 87? Now the human side of things, where you're coming from, that wouldn't be in this space. Because
It's all about
is
I'm intersecting between
But it should-
this space and
Yeah.
human
It
space.
should be in this space, shouldn't it? It should
Yes,
be-
yes,
I
this
think
is-
that's
and
what
Well, suddenly
This
you've
is
got it in a
everything.
different layer when it's actually the same.
he comes
Yeah.
in
same
as
function.
resource actor or
It's up here.
Yes.
Sorry, I'll say
see
Yeah.
this.
if you go up here, you've got your forces. That's the environment in which you work. That's external forces, such as the market, internal forces, such as the behaviours your employees, whether you're on strike, internal factors.
I think what
And then from that, you can see how we drive things like
I
driving
think Tom, what
expectations.
Tom's saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, you're saying that there are some processes which are orchestrated in time in an organisation which have no systems.
Well, the
elements
problem is
altogether,
they're
and then-
interchangeable, they're fungible.
Okay.
So that, for example, take a real world example that's coming up right now, which is a lot of the IoT stuff. Is that an application data or hardware? And the answer is yes. Because you've got embedded data, which is also the program, which is also the hardware. You know, think of a PLA, a programmable logic array. Is it hardware or software? The answer is yes.
Yes.
So that a lot of these categorizations start to break down in what look like edge cases, but are rapidly becoming mainstream. When I deal with disaster recovery, I have to simulate exactly what an IT system does with human processes. And it therefore has to be exactly fungible, which means that I've got to model it as if it's the same at the abstract layer, and then implement it with alternative implementations that use the same functional interface. And I came across this originally with Australia Post, which is where the sorting of the mail can be done by any appropriate combination of machines, IT, or people. They have to be fungible because we've got different load layers. We are modelling them the same way in different places. We're doing different trade-offs to give us different balances in different places. Some places don't have the IT, they've only got human. So these kind of interactions, I've got to be able to support, but I can't support it with this kind of frame.
Okay, so what you're saying is that they are.
Can you?
No, I can't.
Yeah, I kind of, because I say, from what you're describing, for me I see the business process bit as the bit which kind of holds it together and it's what links to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at this and actually my issue is more around the data one because I can't see any physical data in this thing. And actually, paper is just another bit of data.
Where does it, sorry, where does it
So I see that.
You've got data media. I can't
Because it's
see
using
my
the table.
Yeah, sorry, so I thought
Maybe, but
it's the anytime object.
it just looks in the wrong place. That's the
Table is
trouble.
you've got the entity.
It's media
Yeah,
there.
But you've got the,
Yeah.
you've got the object which was.
I see this as a tick list. This is
Yeah. Oh yeah, I see it as
yeah.
have I thought of all the
Sorry, you got something amongst hands.
No, it's all right because that's we're in. That's why
If you
we're.
want to chase up what I did, it's documented in a book of mine called Mapping the Enterprise. It goes through all of the structure and the reasoning why I take that.
I think it might be worthwhile we have another session, if I'm honest, because some of this stuff I kind of.
I know you like, and because you live primarily in a
Well, I live in
conventional
the real
world.
one, but you have to develop good systems.
But you're developing IT systems. I'm developing fungible systems. I have to. I've got
What, the whole point of an IT
Yeah.
system
Yeah.
is to orchestrate some kind of business process.
Yeah.
That's
No,
what
it
in
orchestrates the
an
IT part.
enterprise. All right, anyway,
Right.
look, we're taking over your thing. I'm really sorry.
Look in healthcare. Healthcare is another one I deal with all the time. literally all the time. I read the BMJ every week.
Let him.
So
we're not
I need to hear what your world is. I'm trying to avoid it. At the same time, you would appreciate I've got alarm bells ringing really loud. Because this was exactly what I worked to resolve and remove, is what you're putting back in as what's intended. I'm really worried.
It's like anything. How do you use it? What outcome do you want from this? And for me, this is not exactly like Zadman. It's a tick list. You make sure things are done. And
It's just a tool, isn't it? And it's method of communication.
anyway, sorry, Simon, you carry on.
it's
I warned you on that. So.
No, it's because the thing is, as you say, it's trying to articulate things in relation to that. I mean, however we used to craft it, however we used to change it, according to the commentary here, absolutely fine. But the idea is that you're not following this kind of, we start here and we end up...
If you talk about it being a linear development, no, I agree entirely. If you're talking about it being, the idea of BCD being, you do the business, then you do the... But I reframed it a long time ago as big picture, common and detail from BCD. And I published that. Desperately tried to get them to accept it before TOGAF 9. TOGAF 9 implemented exactly what they shouldn't have done.
Shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's not stay on TOGAF, let's
But
focus on
Yes,
this.
but BCD isn't prescriptive in TOGAF. It doesn't say you have to do BCD. It says actually choose the right path for what you're doing.
It does, and
Just does it really
the idea is that with this you can choose where you want to start. So if your project involves areas in the application area, for example, and you've got something you want to somehow connect it to, I don't know, security, then the idea is that you don't directly make a relationship between there to security. You can traverse the pathway to it through these objects, and that's what you're trying to do. Because to get to security, there are pathways between. So there's an indirect relation between security and, for example, application rights. And all these things, everything on here is all joined together, but it's the direction in which you're looking at.
I'll tell you where this would be brilliant. I'm totally
just
honest.
giving you the prominence type stuff.
Where I think this would add great value is if you're a solution architect building a solution design, this will act as your kind of tick list.
Yeah.
And I think,
And also this is what he's just been saying about trails of provenance, that I can prove that I connect to security by all of these pathways. It's just that a lot of my stuff goes through the human at the same time.
I would probably disagree on some stuff. For example, security is not always at the business layer. You have devices which are not,
When you're doing an application, this is one of the reasons why I did the services the way I did, is for exactly what that was saying, is that a service, that a security process like a protocol or an identity management is happening at the application layer. It is a service.
But then what you're doing is, let me just play this out then, because what you're doing in effect is, so let's just take a platform device that we're talking about, right? And you're talking about the security of the platform device. So what you're saying, what do we mean by security? So what we do is look at the relationships and the significance of the security, because this is part of this would be the organisation's platform device. So security is...
Which you always go, that's right, I looked at that and
This is why the layering part may not actually be correct.
Right, so let's show an example.
What show an example here, right? Let's talk about security.
We are massive
You've got application
application
security depends on physical security, depends on the data security, and then depends back. Infrastructure security may jump straight over all the things.
Yes.
Can I say something?
No, because... Sorry, go ahead.
Right, okay. We're putting security at the business layer. Let's take a device. Let's take a network monitoring denial of service type device. There are no business rules. All it's doing is sniffing packets and it's rerouting stuff. That will never go up the food chain.
But there is a security element which is a business concern.
so why
it's a business driver.
That security thing is more
the implication.
what
Security.
what are you trying? No, why you've got security? So the packet sniffing is actually around
you've got one.
But
preventing unauthorised access.
You have devices that sit there that have nothing to do with business rules.
Well,
They're just
you wouldn't have them if they had nothing to do with business rules.
Yeah,
Because it's all about,
All right, anything
you
else
have them,
going through?
security is about protecting your assets.
Agree.
All right,
So actually, you have it
let's-
there because it's
That's your
somehow,
assets.
You've got physical in
assets.
here, you've got all my security in here, but what is it, what's the significance to the business?
Yeah.
Because you can have security, and it's not appropriate as a business, and that's how it works. Sorry. Let's go, keep it
because
coming.
you can operate without having security.
Yeah.
And you put security in because it's protecting,
Right, okay.
This is-
Let's pick up
business
firewall rules.
which is
So
business
is
security.
security actually part of this though?
Yes,
Because-
it's the top layer. It's got
Yes.
Yeah, but he's saying
Yes.
everything goes to the top layer. I'm
Yes.
saying sometimes it doesn't.
Because I think with modern day security now, we've got to see
But actually you've got to show up
protect.
first governance that does.
The
You're right there.
traditional way of looking
No,
at
no.
security has changed
Yeah.
somewhat.
But
Okay, sorry,
what I'm
What I
saying is-
will do is, let me just,
Yeah, the whole purpose of security.
this is absolutely excellent actually, because this is gets you thinking, right? But and critiquing, that's what his intention here. So let me just move on and then we can just play a bit more. As I said,
Before you do
before
this, it's really good, and I like that.
okay.
So we're arguing about it.
Yeah, so what the idea is that you try and, in terms of the architectural layers, is go from the conceptual, which is the most sort of, the context in which we exist. So effectively, this is where you situate those so-called meta objects. So for each of those meta objects, you define the things that you saw earlier, but they're very abstract, they can apply to any enterprise. So the idea is that we actually subclass
Sorry,
or
could you
categorize
just throw a
them.
flag here again? Because why, in which case, if they're all contextual, why do you have logical and physical for objects that are logical and physical in the same space? I'm confused as to why they're appearing in two places.
Right, okay, we're talking about the meta objects that describe those logical and physical, yeah? Whereas here, we're describing how we
So there's your
instantiate.
instantiation.
Yes, so let's show you.
Different layers, remember I talked about that? Right, different layering of instantiation.
But I still think you're right though, why would you need to define the type of their object?
I can see what you're saying, so
Yeah.
Anyway.
Let me play it out because
instantiation.
what you're doing here, now this is a screenshot of the tool that we've got, and on here what you can do is you can find out what the so-called semantic relationships are. So you can see it can cut across various layers directly. So a data object enables creation of a report. So you're defining the pathways by which it goes, and there's just some more examples here.
In your data objects, is that a data consistency as well?
That's it.
Yeah, it also, but this is only a screenshot of part of this.
Service.
Did you say